Mine eyes have seen the future of college football, and what does that entail for the BYU Cougars? We're going to talk about it on today's show.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you who are everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. The motto is your team every day, and as such, this is your original daily podcast focused on all things BYU. Let's launch in today's show and talk a little bit about a bigger picture thing in college football and college sports in general, but I believe will absolutely have an impact on BYU, and I believe something that BYU should embrace. And what is that? It is the so-called Super League that has been proposed by a 20-person panel, including college presidents, TV execs, or talking power players in the college sports universe. They believe the future of college football resides in what they are terming to be an 80-team Super League, which would include 70 of the current, or essentially the 70 Power 4 programs currently as constituted, broken up into 10-team leagues. There'd be 7 10-team leagues, and those 70 teams, including BYU, would never be in danger of falling out of this league, whereas the 8th group in this, a 10-team conference, would be made up of the top of the other 50 schools, or 50 or so of the FBS ranks, and essentially there'd be a promotion relegation battle every year in that 8th conference to come up and play with the quote-unquote big boys, and if you succeed, you have a chance to really compete at the highest level. If not, you sink back down and play in that second tier. Why is this a good thing for BYU? Well, I'll just say this. The future of college athletics is coming via revenue sharing at some point in the near-term future. This has been on the docket for many moons now. There have been some coaches who've been fairly outspoken about this. There's been whispers around from many more who have talked about the fact that the current model for college athletics, what I'm talking about, think of what's going on with the collective situation, which, by the way, the NCAA Division I Council is now have a proposal in front of them to allow schools to essentially begin doing in-house NIL. And if that is approved, you can guarantee BYU is going to be in the mix for that, and obviously being able to set up their athletes from the school itself and the athletic department itself to do that in-house. And I think that's probably a better model overall. But the simple fact of the matter is, currently, as constituted, name, image, and likeness rules, the rise of collectives, the double dipping of many boosters having to contribute both to athletic departments, maybe in single individual programs, while at the same time being asked to donate in kind to NIL collectives to retain and acquire the best talent you possibly can get. That model is unsustainable, folks. I'm not breaking any news. I don't think anybody has looked into this and or thought about it for any longer than it feels like 5 minutes would come to the same conclusion. It is a wholly unsustainable model. Well, what is sustainable in college sports? It's the professionalization of collegiate sports. And I know that a number of you out there within the sound of my voice are going to just kind of shudder at the thought of that. You don't want to have a miniature NFL. I get that. It was when it comes to college football. You don't want to have this become professional sports. But here's the deal. With what is going on in college sports right now, either it is going to implode on itself, or they're going to find a better model. And the current proposal that has been put out there, I believe they said that according to The Athletic, it came from Andrew Marchand as well as Stuart Mandel. The ACC has met with this 20-person panel, and includes guys like E. Gordon Gee, who is currently president of West Virginia University. And some of you might know that President Gee is a native of Vernal, Utah. So just kind of a random tidbit there. But he is one of the luminaries in this group. And their whole idea is that you're going to have to find a way to share money and revenue share with these student athletes. Does that mean they will be unionized? Does that mean they'll be classified as employees? Well, that remains to be determined in terms of what the overall structure of it will be. But this is absolutely the future of what college sports is going to entail in some form or fashion. Let me also add this. I love the 7-team conference idea with 10 teams each. creates a true round-robin format of 9 conference games across all these leagues. You play every team in your league is currently constituted. Then you could play up to 3 non-conference games against your fellow Power 5 or whatever they're going to call it, the Super League teams. Or maybe you could dip down and grab one annually from that 50 or so other teams that create that second division. And maybe some teams from the current FCS ranks would jump up into that second division with the whole thought that they want to have a chance to compete at the big time. But regardless, I believe this is going to be what the future is for sports, and BYU, they got into the right time. Now, there are some out there like Bob Thompson, who's a former president of Fox Sports and has negotiated a number of these contracts that go to these conferences. He predicts that this would not happen until at least the 2030s, and that's absolutely true because you have to get through the majority, at least at minimum, of the current conference TV deals, and also you have to obviously navigate the choppy waters that would be ESPN, Fox, CBS, on down the line in terms of not stepping on their toes enough where they feel like they're being cut out of this situation. You probably have them as an equity partner in all of this. But the whole thing is BYU got in at the right time. And Bob Thompson has also said that he thinks that only 48 teams would make the cut. You know what? Every one of the teams currently in that power ranks, there's not a chance and you know what, that they're going to be like, oh, you're going to take those 48 teams and we're not going to get it. That's going to have a whole nother thing. If you don't take the current top tier of college sports, and I'm including BYU in this conversation, the teams that if and when they get left out, you can guarantee that there is going to be antitrust lawsuits, injunctions, the whole kit and caboodle when it comes to lawyers. And yes, there will be lawyers at all levels of this, but I believe that this is the model that is going to be the most sustainable going forward. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I welcome your guys' feedback. But the thing is, I look at this, and the only way it feels like there is a sustainable model where student athletes, or I hate the term student athlete, I need to stop using that, where the athletes in these circumstances, and I'm including football, basketball, on down the list, and all these athletic departments, they should have the opportunity to garner money off of their name, image, and likeness. They are the athletes who have, by and large, created what is a billion and in many cases, multi-billion dollar industries, especially when it comes to college football. They should benefit from this. But once again, with current circumstances being what they are, asking boosters and the lay fan out there to contribute to the Cougar Club and BYU circumstance and to contribute to the athletic department, and then just turn around, right around and have another handout from the collective side of things and say you need to contribute here as well if you want to have your team truly compete and be able to have the right athletes. It's just at some point there's a breaking point, and it's going to implode upon itself if you do not find a better way forward. It's going to take probably a decade or so to get the ducks in a row if this is ultimately what's going to transpire. But I am in full agreement with what is being proposed here. Yes, I'd like to see a few things tweaked, but a 16-team playoff with the 8 conference champions as well as 8 at-large bids getting into this, that is, in my mind, that's like hog heaven. That's what I've wanted my entire life when it comes to this sport. Yes, it would become more of an NFL-esque model. It's a miniature professional league, and miniature in relative terms because we all know the Leviathan that the NFL is, but there are more teams, there's more stakes holders, there's more involved in all of this. But it really feels like this is the only way, and I mean the only way for college sports to have a sustainable future in the current circumstances we find ourselves in. Am I wrong? Do you think I'm up in the night? I'd welcome your feedback. Drop it in the show notes below, in the comment section. I guess I should say wherever you're listening or watching this on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. And let me know. Reach out on social media as well. You can see my X handle right there, Jacob C. Hatch. Locked On Cougars is Locked On Cougars on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. I truly do welcome your guys' feedback. Let me know what you think. But I do think that the current proposal, in my opinion, it is really, in my mind, the only way forward if you don't want to have the current model completely implode upon itself and have something else that's like a zombie version of what we've come to love when it comes to college sports evolve out of that. All right, coming up here in just a minute, we're going to look back in the history books where I was kind of projecting forward just a minute ago. We're going to look back to 1925 for the BYU football program, just their 4th season as an intercollegiate football program, but had some interesting tidbits about it. And yes, the most successful season to date for the BYU Cougars. We'll dig into that next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Robinhood. You don't even have a 401k for retirement. You can still have an IRA alongside it. Robinhood is the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you can subscribe to Robinhood Gold, my friends. Get this. Now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right. No cap on that 3% match as well. Robinhood Gold gets you the best, or the most, for your retirement, thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. And many of you out there are considering how you're going to go about your retirement. A lot of us have 401ks, multiple or maybe just one. Guess what? You can diversify and have an extra fund. You can do that with our friends at Robinhood. The offer is still good through April 30th. Start at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees do apply. And now for some legal info, you need to check this out. Claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risks, including the risk of loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date from the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions, obviously. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Man, I am tripping all over the place today. I want to remind you guys, are you sick of watching Fox Sports or ESPN or any one of the other network channels out there and having to turn down the volume because of all the screaming and yelling going on? Well, I want you guys to make the switch over to Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every single day, bringing the big stories without the screaming that's going on the other networks. Locked On Sports Today brings you all the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV Channels app. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, let's talk about BYU in 1925. We talked last time in our look back at all 100 seasons of BYU football. In 1924, we saw the end of the first run of BYU football and a head coach with Alvin Twitchell exiting stage right and heading to Colorado College, where he would continue coaching, albeit in collegiate basketball. Well, enter Eugene L. Roberts. Now, E.L. Roberts, as many of you might recall, is a long time fixture in the early years of BYA and also Brigham Young University. He was the athletic director for BYU, helped usher in the new era of intercollegiate football for BYU, but he was instrumental in this second era, I guess the opening of what we'll call the Chic Hart era for BYU. Now, he hired Charles J. Hart, an alumnus of Utah State University, or what was then Utah Agricultural College, where he was a standout player. He was 29 years old when he joined the BYU staff. He was installed ostensibly as BYU head coach, and he is credited as BYU's second head coach. But let's just put it this way. E.L. Roberts had an outsized role in this iteration of the BYU football program. That's not a bad thing because both of them traveled back east, according to what I was reading in the Banyan, which is the BYU yearbook. They spent 12 weeks studying football and devising what they ultimately was dubbed the Roberts-Hart system. Now, what is the Roberts-Hart system? Well, it yielded the best single season to date in BYU football history. The Cougars, as many of you might recall, had never reached 500 in a season. The 1924 season ended with a record of 2-3-1. And BYU just never was able to get over the hump and get back to 500 in their early years under Alvin Twitchell. Well, they did that in 1925. Charles Hart, I'm going to call him Chic, ended up coaching at BYU for many, many years, a member of the BYU, what I'm trying to say, the PE department as a university professional for decades, quite literally. He led BYU to their best their best record in history to date, with a 3-3 overall record, 3-3 in the Rocky Mountain Conference, and their best finish in the conference to date with a 6th place finish, by far their best season in their scant history to this point as we look back at these. What really led BYU to the success this season was a tailback and a fullback tandem of Fred Buck Dixon and Clarence Silky Knudsen. Now, Buck and Silky were their nicknames, and in this era of college football, many of you might recall, every guy on the roster had a nickname of some sort, but here's the deal. These two excuse me, were a 1-2 powerhouse for the BYU football program and were very, very good and led BYU to the success they had in the 1925 season. It was really up to them if BYU was going to have success. If you look back at this season, it was up to them to really lead BYU to success. They opened the season October 10th at Colorado Agricultural. You now know it as Colorado State. Got thoroughly pummeled 21-0 on the road, but then returned home to face off against Colorado College, who Alvin Twitchell had just recently moved over to. Squeaked out their first victory of the season, 7-6, and then up came in 1925 the back-to-back rivalry games against Utah State and Utah. Now, BYU's history in the early years of their football program, not very, very good history against their two in-state rivals. They were at Utah Agricultural at Adams Field, lost that one 14-0. BYU was stopped a couple of times in scoring territory, according to the reports of that game. But then BYU hosted Utah in Provo, and the Utes just absolutely ran roughshod 27-0. So BYU off to a 1-4 start. New coaching program, or new regime, I should say, in place, and probably some questions about what BYU was going to do. But then they responded with two very, very solid wins. November 7th, Western State came to BYU, and Cougars had their highest scoring game in their football history with 39 points in a 39-7 rout of Western State, and then finished it up against future BYU coach Giot Romney's Montana State Bobcats, who came to Provo November 21st, and BYU eked out a 16-7 victory to end their season at 3-3. And once again, that mid-table finish for the Cougars, which was by far their best to date in their football history. Now, a couple of notes about the 1925 season, including that there was a record set by Fred Buck Dixon. I mentioned the fact he was an absolute stud at fullback for BYU, really opening holes and kind of tandeming with Clarence Silky Knudsen as BYU's 1-2 tandem in the backfield, but that does not entail what he accomplished in his BYU career. It wasn't just football that Dixon was a star in. He was a star in tennis, track, and men's basketball, amassing a BYU record 15 letters in his time as a four-sport athlete at Brigham Young University, capping his career in 1925. Buck would end up becoming the BYU men's tennis coach for literally decades, I think until the early 60s. He was a 2-year head coach of the BYU men's basketball program in the 1930s. I think it was 37 and 38. And then also became an assistant after his playing days for the BYU football program. He is indelibly linked with BYU, along with one of his teammates. Team captain in 1925 was Eddie Kimball. Now, he kept a stellar career with 3 seasons of near constant play. He only came off the field a few times, one of them in 1925 due to injury, but he was the first BYU alumnus who would end up becoming BYU head coach down the line, and he finished his legendary career for BYU as a player in 1925. Reading about Eddie Kimball, or as they called him, Elmer, it was his nickname on this team. A guy that was very, very good at end for BYU and would go on ultimately to lead BYU in the World War II era and the lead up to the World War II era, and also shortly after that as their head coach. But obviously, good to see him accomplish some things. And then also in 1925, the reappearance of Boney Fuller on BYU's roster. Now, if you recall, in our 1922, the first season of BYU football, Boney Fuller was a BYU quarterback, or many of his actual given name, Livonia Fuller. Well, for whatever reason, in 1923 and 1924, he did not appear on BYU's roster. But in 1925, there he is. Fuller reappears, ends up playing a multifaceted role, some running back, some wide receiver, it looked like, at an end position for BYU. But I don't know what happened. Why did he take a 2-year hiatus before reappearing on the roster? And we'll talk about how his career rounded out on tomorrow's show in our 1926 look back. But kind of funny that Boney Fuller in this era, you think about, okay, a guy takes 2 years off. Well, his eligibility's run out. Well, apparently not in this era, in the 1920s. You could disappear for 2 years seemingly and then reappear on the roster and continue your career. But overall, a very, very successful season for BYU in 1925. Also marked, I guess, the late 1924 into 1925. Well, there was a pair of kittens that were growing up on BYU campus. Literally, cougar kittens had been purchased by BYU. Cleo and Tarbo, the only live mascots that Brigham Young University ever owned, were growing up and finally becoming what BYU ultimately would debut in 1926. And we'll talk more about this tomorrow. They had a pretty interesting debut as BYU's live mascots. And let's just put it this way. Interesting interesting times when you have live Cougars living on campus. And it's kind of a funny story. And we'll talk more about that on tomorrow's edition of the podcast. One of those things you look back on, you're like, wow, what could have been. And obviously, there's a lot of people out there. I've heard it from time to time that they'd like to see BYU go back to having a live mascot like Mike the Tiger for LSU, etc. I just don't see that for BYU. I just don't see them saying, you know what we're going to do? We're going to capture or buy a Cougar and put it on the sidelines or have it on campus for BYU. I just do not see that happening because I just don't see where the facilities would be for the Cougars. But hey, they once upon a time did have it, and it lasted for essentially 3 years. And then things changed, and we'll talk more about that on tomorrow, or our next edition of Locked On Cougars. Not tomorrow, it'll be on Monday, as we look back at the 1926 season. So overall, the 1925 season, a very, very successful year, a very successful debut for Charles Hart. Alas, it was only for a short time. The good times were only to be enjoyed for a very short period with an upperclassman group that was very, very battle-tested and helped BYU to that success in 1925. And once again, we'll talk about 1926 on tomorrow's edition. I keep saying tomorrow's, our next edition of Locked On Cougars. All right, coming up here in just a minute, we'll talk about some other notes in BYU sports, another transfer portal target emerging for BYU basketball, and Kyle Van Noy, the BYU legend himself, secures another contract for himself at the NFL level. We'll dig into all that coming up next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, all of us want to go out to different events, no matter what you're interested in, my friends, whether it's sports, music, no matter theater, no matter what you're into, Game Time's got the options for you guys. You can pick any out specific games or matchup you'd love to attend for whatever sport you're looking forward to. The best part is right now, Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball. So if it's baseball season, you're planning on making some travel out to watch an MLB game, well, Game Time can help you out on that. The best part is it doesn't matter what you're into. I can tell you from personal experience, Game Time helped me out in a big, big way when it came to getting out to see the WWE, when it came to BYU, came to the Delta Center not that long ago. Many of you know that I'm a big wrestling fan, WWE fan, and The Rock is my guy. When I heard that he was going to be appearing at the Delta Center, I knew I could not miss out. So what did I do? I hopped on the Game Time app, found some tickets, 2 taps. They were in my inbox, and off we went to the event. It's that simple, my friends. It's an absolutely incredible thing. The best part is I knew exactly what I was going to pay. It was an all-in price. There were no fees that popped up as I'm checking out and saying, whoa, where did this all come from? It was all in. I could see the price right up front with our friends at Game Time. The best part is they got Game Time lowest price ticket guarantee. They'll credit you 110% of the difference if you can find better seats in the same row, a better price, I should say, on seats in the same row that you buy your tickets in. It's as simple as that, my friends. The best part is all your tickets reside in the Game Time app. So take the guesswork out of your buying your tickets today and download the Game Time app, create an account, use the promo code Locked On College. You heard that right, Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. I'll just tell you this much: those WWE tickets, that $20 off helped out a little bit as well. So terms apply. Again, create that account and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. I appreciate all of you for being a part of it. If you have not done so already, please consider subscribing and joining our Locked On Cougars Insider Group. Really, really been a fun thing to have interaction with you guys and literally sending text messages back and forth with y'all. It's a 14-day free trial to see if it's the right option for you guys. But if you are interested in doing so, you can find the links to it in the show notes below, whether you're watching and or listening to this. All right. Before we go on today's show, I want to say congratulations to BYU, a star and all around just incredible player, Kyle Van Noy. Literally, I got off the couch and joined the Baltimore Ravens early on in the 2023 NFL season. Goes on to have an absolute career year as a pass rusher for Baltimore, and for his efforts and his starring role at points for the Baltimore Ravens, he secured himself a 2-year extension to extend his stay there in Baltimore. So congratulations to KVN, one of the all-time greats, maybe one of the, I would say he's up there in terms of, at worst, top 5 defensive players in BYU football history. I'd say there's an argument for him being the most impactful and potentially the greatest of all time, but really, really cool to see him continuing to do what he's doing in the NFL. And this is a guy who thought his career might be over last season when he didn't get a call in training camp. And hey, All you can do is capitalize on the opportunities given to you. And congratulations to Kyle as he secures another 2 years, it looks like, in the NFL. Now, on the BYU basketball front, we've been talking about these from time to time. When a name pops up that I feel like is an absolute name the BYU basketball fans should know when it comes to the transfer portal, I'm going to mention them. The newest one to pop up is Mady Sissoko. Now, many of you might recall Mady. He was a guy that visited BYU during his prep days. He played at Wasatch Academy down there in Mount Pleasant, Utah. If you remember, he came to BYU and broke his hand in an ATV accident on his official visit to BYU. Ultimately committed and signed with the Michigan State Spartans, playing for Tom Izzo out there. And he has now entered the transfer portal as a grad transfer from MSU. What does he offer? Well, he offers a defensive-oriented game. He is not necessarily the tall, rangy big that I have advocated for BYU to go grab, but at 6'9", 250 pounds, he adds a defensive punch that would be welcome, I think, for BYU if he ultimately were to opt to play for the Cougars. Now, does he fit with what BYU is trying to do? That's a big question mark, because in his career at Michigan State this past season, for example, he played 35 games, 15 minutes per game, 56.8% from the field, but 3.3 points and also just 5 rebounds. So playing a bit of a bit role. He ended up the year before playing 21.4 points, having a career high 5.1 points and 6.1 rebounds on average. This is not a guy who is going to, I feel like, fill it up when it comes to the stats. But if BYU wants an athletic big who can come in and hopefully add some defensive prowess, I think it's exactly what Mady Sissoko could do for the Cougars. He has averaged about half a block per game throughout his career. To this point, he's played 4 seasons, 25 games, 30 games, 34 games, 35 games played in his time for Michigan State. So he's played a lot of basketball. Could he be the option that BYU is looking for in the transfer portal? I think so, but I don't think he's the ideal candidate for BYU. And what I mean by that is you want a guy, because if you're going to bring in a big man, ostensibly to complement a guy like Ali Khalifa and or Fousseyni Traore, and we don't know exactly what Atiki is going to do. I know that Robbie McCombs has mentioned that there are rumblings and people telling him that Atiki may ultimately decide to redshirt what would be his senior year and then have an extra year to play when Ali Khalifa and Foose age out and graduate. Regardless, Mady Sissoko could be a nice option for BYU, but I just don't see him being at the top of their wish list. And maybe he has no interest in coming back to Utah. That's another thing about this. It has to kind of be a two-way street. If he wants to come home, quote unquote, to Utah and play where he played his prep ball in high school, great. He would add to a very strong African contingent. And what I mean by that is guys like Ali Khalifa, Fousseyni Traore, Atiki, and Mady Sissoko all hail from the continent of Africa. So it'd be very interesting to see if he ultimately opts to play for BYU. And also, we'll see if BYU has interest in him. But that is a name, once again, these transfer portal targets that pop up. That is absolutely a name, Mady Sissoko, to file away potentially down the road here. And there, by the way, starting yesterday, there is a moratorium through the end, through I think it's next Thursday, due to NCAA with the Final Four, the tournament ongoing, and also the coaches convention down there in Arizona. There's a dead period for a week. So don't expect much movement in terms of guys getting offers, visits, that type of stuff until maybe the following week, maybe mid-month when things really get cooking, but we'll see what happens on that front. So there you go. That's what I got for you guys on this Friday edition of the podcast. 2 other quick notes. BYU softball opened their series at UCF with a 3-2 loss to the Knights. They'll be back in action today against UCF down there in Orlando. You can catch on ESPN+. Also, BYU baseball bringing out the big bats in their opener against Texas. They went to Austin, won that game 7-5. Game 2 of that series also today. You can catch that on ESPN Plus and the Longhorn Network, if I recall correctly, if you want to tune into that. But good to see BYU going yard, and they were teeing off, it felt like, at points against the Texas Longhorns. So a solid win for BYU baseball, and we'll see what BYU softball does in terms of maybe rebounding today against the UCF Knights. All right, so there you go. That's what I got for you guys. A big thank you to all of you for your support of the podcast. As always, please continue to subscribe, rate, review, share it. Word of mouth in building this audience is absolutely critical. And let's just put it this way. We may or may not have bought some BYU football tickets yesterday. Yes, we are back with a pair of tickets for the upcoming BYU football season, and we'll be rewarding our listeners. So if you don't necessarily maybe have the means to get out to a BYU football game, well, this might be the option for you guys to get out to a game or two this season. We'll talk more about that as obviously the season gets a little bit closer, 148 days away from today. But nonetheless, a big thank you to all of you, as always, for your support of the podcast. Hope you all are doing well on this Friday. Have a great weekend. We will reconvene on Monday, and we'll see what the future holds for us. I got some interviews I've still got cooked up and holding on to from the last day of BYU spring camp. We had a chance to catch up with a number of athletes. We'll kind of dole those out in the upcoming weeks. And we're also going to break into a little more recruiting talk, I think, as well as we get in really to the offseason portion of BYU sports. So regardless, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Thank you to all of you who are everydayers as well. And until next time, my friends, this has been the Locked On Cougars podcast.